So often businesses, without realizing, can have a negative impact on the communities or on their stakeholders. And often they don't realize, for example, that if they don't advertise jobs locally, local people can't get them. They think, oh, we use a recruitment agency, and they don't realize if the recruitment agency is in a city 100 miles away from where they're building the thingy, then they are inadvertently making the jobs inaccessible to local people. So that's sort of one example. It's about finding, so there are lots of sort of ways where companies, they don't intentionally mean to have a negative impact, but they do. And then the positive side is there are sometimes things that, because they don't understand what the barriers are or the challenges are for people, they don't see that there's really simple things that they can do to make improvements. So an example of that might be, I'm doing some work at the moment with a wind farm client, and they are doing a whole load of felling in order to build the wind farm and then replanting. And so I called a meeting with the company who were doing the replanting, and I said, is there anything else that we could do as well as this replanting that might improve the biodiversity of this area? And they said, yeah, there is actually. There's a little pond which the locals have wanted to be flooded for years, but they haven't been able to make it happen because there's been a commercial forest on this site. If you could just block that little stream and flood that small pond and make it a bigger pond, there's a really important, lots of peat, really important biodiversity site. And so I asked all the stakeholders, nobody had any objections. It's not going to cost us anything, very minimal cost. That's an easy example of a way that we can have a positive impact and without really doing very much. But it's all about asking the questions. You have to ask the questions and find out what people need, and then how your operations are impacting them. How it kind of came about was I was working in politics and working for David Cameron, and I was his external relations advisor, and I was being lobbied and looking at all these companies that were lobbying ministers to try and change things. And I was thinking, if you didn't lobby, if you just did what the policymakers wanted, then they would come to you and you wouldn't have to spend all this money. Why are you fighting it? And when I looked at the things that people were lobbying against, they weren't, it was stuff that actually consumers wanted and people wanted. And I suddenly thought, it's crazy. Why are they why are they not recycling more of their waste? Why are they not paying people fairly? Why are they, and when I looked at it, there weren't really any commercial drivers for this behavior, this sort of negative behavior to continue. Actually, the opposite was true. And that in the past, I think businesses really only had one sort of group of stakeholders that they really paid attention to, and that was their shareholders, and it was very profit driven, and a lot of businesses still do operate on that model. But 10 years ago, advent of the iPhone, global transformation, the world has totally changed. We're all interconnected, and information is free and accessible. The world's completely changed, and now in the same way that politicians are answerable to the people that elect them, our corporations are answerable to a much broader range of stakeholders, and that's everything from their staff to their suppliers to their customers to even people who will never buy their products. So somebody who will never ever buy your product can influence your business in how your business is perceived, and you just can't. The commercial drivers now for this kind of behavior are much stronger. So if you want to win public sector contracts, the public sector will now ask its suppliers for what they call social value. So they'll say, what can you do to create these are the outcomes that we want to see through the delivery of the contract. What can you do to create it? And that's where I might come in and I will say, right, what are the outcomes that they want, and how are you delivering the contract, and what can you do? But how can you do it in such a way that it doesn't increase your costs? Because it doesn't have to be. Good social value is actually just good business. So it shouldn't have to cost you a lot extra, and it shouldn't have to drive costs up. And I think that is one of the things that I'm working really hard to kind of combat against is this, that I can kind of see social value going down the road that health and safety goes, So health and safety has saved thousands of lives since it was implemented, millions of lives probably since it was implemented in the 70s. It's a really good thing, but we all know people who use health and safety and GDPR actually is another one, as a reason to not do something because they quite honestly can't be bothered, or they don't understand the legislation, or they don't understand it. And you do see that with social value. You see people that don't understand it delivering it badly, or asking suppliers for things which are expensive or unreasonable, and that just turns it into another hoop to jump through that a supplier to the public sector has to jump through if they want the work. And I don't think it should be the case. It's absolutely essential that you consider the social value that you create, well, that the social value you create contributes towards building the economic value of your business. So I call it create social value, build economic value. It's a really important part of my philosophy, because businesses are not charities, and we need to be really clear about this. So the businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. They provide the jobs that pay the wages, that pay the taxes, that keep the public sector going, that keeps the whole thing running. It's a symbiotic relationship, and the public, the private, and the third sector all need each other. But the private sector is the engine of, it provides it's the powerhouse. And so we need businesses to be profitable. We need them to make money, but they shouldn't. And this is why I'm really excited about being alive now, is that they are no longer able to make money in a way that detracts value from other people. Because if you decide that you're going to employ child labour, or you're going to have unsafe operating processes on your factory floor, a member of staff can take a video or they can scan your company document, internal policy that you've declared is confidential, and they can have it online and millions of people can watch it with a click of a button. So you basically can't get away with that kind of bad behavior. It will catch you, it will damage you. So your best thing to do is just not to do it. And you might think in the short term, well, that's going to cost me money, and it is, but in the long term, it's going to build value for your business. The businesses that do it well do see the benefits. I think you say this, this idea that once you start, you never look back. And it's really true, because you start doing it, and you see that you have better relationships with your staff, or you recruit. It's much easier to recruit staff because people want to work for companies that do this. It's much easier to retain them because they want to stay working for a company that cares about the way it operates. Customers, people want to buy from you. Stakeholders is a really big part of this, is that it really helps strengthen and build stakeholder relationships, especially if some of your key stakeholders are policymakers or the public sector, because this is a huge priority for them at the moment. When I was talking about how when I was working in government, and I was like, why don't these people just do this stuff? Like, what we're asking them is not that unreasonable. It's not political. Take the politics out of it. If you didn't know it was the Tories, you didn't know what political party, and you just read it, you'd be like, well, that seems very reasonable. And what I realized is that the way that companies are structured is, if something is legislation, then they have a system for embracing it. So something becomes law, it's someone's job in the company to make sure that they are compliant with the law and current legislation. And if new legislation gets rolled in, like GDPR, most really good recent example, then there's a whole system of processes that help companies get up to speed with it. But the government doesn't like to use legislation. Certainly the Conservative government doesn't like to use it. Plus, it's very hard to get new legislation on the books. It takes time, although you wouldn't know it given the amount that we've had in the recent years. But and particularly with Brexit, there hasn't been the parliamentary time to get legislation. So government uses lots and lots and lots of other mechanisms to get its policy intentions out and levers to get people to do what it wants. So it will do a review, and it will have recommendations in the review. It will put out a policy document, or it will and what happens is all that stuff doesn't get read, because there's thousands and thousands of pages, and it's really hard to understand. And and it's really interesting if you look at the social value model that the government have just recently released for with PPN 06. A lot of the outcomes are linked to some of these policy recommendations that have never been legislation, and probably will never be legislation for lots of different reasons. And so it's just, I think a big part of what I do is about taking those policymakers' intentions and what they would like companies to do, and translating that into plain English, and finding ways that companies can deliver the things that are just really common sense, because a lot of it is just common sense. It's not particularly political. We need all of us to make the change that we need to see. It's not rocket science. And once you understand it, and once you see how it's going to grow your business, and once you see how you can do it in a way without raising costs, and once you see all the benefits and all the value that you create, you just never really go back. So I want I produce a social value files because I want as many people as possible to be able to understand it and be able to do it themselves.